Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, and glad that you could join us. Tonight, we're going to be talking to Mike King. Mike King lives in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, and has a layout on the third story of his farmhouse, and we're going to talk about his layout, how he got started in the hobby, and a whole bunch more. So we'll get right into it. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ray. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you, Mike, and glad you could take some time out for us to have this chat and tell us a little bit about your layout and so on. I know the weather's turning nice, and you've got a whole bunch of projects going on there.
Oh yeah, keep busy.
That's for sure. So we'll tell everybody, Mike, your profession, you're a farmer and you live on a farm. Is that correct?
Yep. Well, I'm a full-time farmer as of last week. Up until then, I was working professional life, and I gave that up so I can farm full-time. But I've always done both. So. All
right. So focusing in on the farming and whatnot. But the layout in the top story of your farmhouse, I've been there. It took me a while to get there. Let's start with that. I know you were having op sessions, and it seemed like every time you had an op session, I had something going on. But finally, all the stars aligned, and I was able to go up and see your layout, and I'm really glad I was able to do that. And now I've been there, I don't know if I'd call it a dozen times, but we're getting close to a dozen times where I've been up to operate on your layout. And what really excites me to talk to you about your layout is because, you and I have had some side conversations about this, that you and I are kind of similar, that we have the smaller layouts on the circuit of the operating crew that we work on, and kind of the pros and cons of having a smaller layout. And we kind of focus on the pros more than we do the cons, and really like to kind of get into that a little bit as well. But let's start with how that layout got up there on that third story of the farmhouse.
Well, that was I originally had it on a bedroom in the second story, but that space needed to get taken over for one of my kids. So I made the room that it's in now up in the attic. So it's a 16 by 16 foot room that I insulated and kind of finished. I could have done a better job, but it's good enough. I didn't want to wait. I want to get working again. So I had a layout on the second floor. It was based on the New Haven. It was all hand laid track and turnouts, just because I wanted to do that. And then when I moved upstairs, I said, okay, I did that once. That's enough. I don't need to do that again.
Yeah, so the hand laying and handmade turnouts was just not anything that was overly appealing to do a second time.
Well, yeah, and my time's somewhat limited, so I could nail down 3 feet of flex track in 15 seconds, or spend an entire night laying out, hand laid track, 3 feet of hand laid track. So I would have never gotten done.
Very true. So you moved it up to the third level, and then you said downstairs it was the New Haven, and now currently, what's the railroad that you're modeling?
Right now, I model the CSX, and it's the Framingham branch, and the area in particular is in Mansfield, Massachusetts. There's an industrial area down there that has some rail-served businesses still, not as many as I model, but it's loosely based on that. And then another area called the Chocolate, where there used to be a chocolate factory, and a little bit of modeler's license to include New England Sugars in Worcester. So all local.
Yeah, we'll definitely be talking about the New England Sugars area of your layout, because that's certainly one that's notable. But you went from New Haven to CSX. Why CSX? What was the reason for change there and changing your railroad?
Because it was local, and I could go rail fan it and see the areas. I was talking with Don Iris about the other layout, and we were going on Google Earth and looking at different places. And there's a place in Norfolk, I think, where there's a crossing at a station that's part of the CSX Framingham branch. So I had spent a lot of time on Google Earth trying to come up with a layout that would go from like Milford or Framingham through Milford down to West Mansfield, and came with a lot of track plans, but they were all too big. So then I started focusing in just on the area in Mansfield. And one of the things that was interesting about it is it has when the track comes off the New England corridor, there's a big curve. So I thought that would would do well in my room where I do need a big curve to get into the industry because it's a relatively small room. So I just started doing different ideas with that and came up with the plan that I have currently.
Yeah, so now you've got you said 16 by 16 room, so now you're building a track plan to match the room, and then match a railroad all and kind of make this magical thing happen where all three kind of tie together.
Yeah, so my modeling is I'm not a railroad guy, so I picked the CSX because I like the colors, that kind of thing, which is that's fine. Yeah. But I don't like most of the guys in our group. They can rattle off engines and everything else, and I'm not that person. So I do it for the modeling, and I, eventually came to the point where I started operating with the group, and then that really solidified the direction for my layout to be able to operate and incorporate people coming over and operating and having 4 or 5 guys over to do those sessions.
Yeah, so your layout basically is essentially a layout that happens to have a model railroad on it versus the other way around, it seems, because your focus is really on that, scenery and buildings and whatnot.
Yep. Yeah.
So I know you take a kind of I wouldn't say, maybe unique approach to your buildings. And I know that you've got a method that you started using photographs for some of your buildings. Maybe talk a little bit more on that, because it's kind of interesting where some people are going right to the styrene and doing that, and you've done it a lot with photographs and been able to knock out some really nice buildings.
Yeah, thanks. The buildings are okay. So I do some work with photographs. I do some work with textures that I buy for online as PDFs, and you can print them out. And I do all scratch building with the cardstock models on foam core is what those buildings are made out of. The reason I do that is because I need to practice. I'm not great at building models, and the paper's less expensive and more forgiving, and you can start over. And the scratch building, there's a lot of different textures. There's a lot of different colors, different styles of metal siding. So I also am model modern. So the majority of my buildings were all steel buildings. So there's subtle differences in the textures that you can get from the different companies. So I like that. So they're not all exactly the same, but it's really it's less expensive. I don't get upset when I make mistakes. I mean, I built one large building out of 2 Walthers kits. So there are a few styrene buildings, but right now, by and large, they're all cardstock.
Yeah, and what you've been able to do is you've really, simply by printing them out, you've created a lot of variety in your layout as well by having that simple flexibility.
Yeah, because if you're doing all Walthers, all those walls look the same, and if you do all Ricks, they all look the same, and you can paint them different colors, but you're still going to have the same. Everything's going to look exactly the same. So what I'll do is I'll go on Google Earth, like for New England Sugars. I'll measure out the building on there and scale it all out. And most of those buildings are pretty close to full size because I like really big buildings.
Right.
So I'll go through that through Google Earth. I'll go up and take pictures. I'll go early Sunday mornings and go somewhere. Maybe I shouldn't be in with a tape measure and grab a quick measurement just to make sure it's right.
Right.
But yeah, and I like doing that. I like the scratch building so that the buildings are, they look right to me. I think if you were to drive into Worcester and see New England Sugars and then come into my layout, I think you'd recognize it right away.
Right. Well, yeah, and it that gives it that more accurate look. Obviously, using a photograph to do it. What's your source for that? Where are you finding these photos to be able to these textures and whatnot?
So there's Railroad Graphics. I think there's Team Track Models. There's what's the other one? There's another one that has some good. I'm drawing a blank now. I'll look it up. But there's another. Who is it? Clever Models. Actually, Clever Models has building kits as well as just textures. So that's the main source of everything. There's a company that does a lot of European-based models, but a couple of those look close enough to U.S. as well, and those are really nice. Like over in the chocolate, there's an open brick building that the detail and just all the different parts that they have in the cardstock that you layer up. I think that one came out really nice.
Absolutely. And so let's talk the process. So you've identified a building, you've gone on a website, you've seen kind of the textures that you're looking for, and then you're printing it. Are you printing it on just regular paper, or are you printing on cardstock? What's your paper of choice to do this with?
It's 80-pound cardstock, I think it is.
Okay.
It's not photo or anything like that. It's just the bright white Walmart brand cardstock paper that you can get.
Okay, but it's almost gives it like a matte finish though when it prints. It's not like a high gloss, so that probably adds to the realism to it.
Yeah, and originally I had a printer that had a straight path through it because people were talking about it would curl the paper. But once that one broke, I just went to a regular HP, and I haven't noticed any issues with the curved path, so that's fine.
So it's so what you found is not only more giving you that accurate look, but a far more like affordable way of just adding a ton of buildings onto a layout without and again it's things that even if it stood in place or there permanently, it gives you adds to the speed of getting that layout up and running with buildings on it.
Yeah, and these are the other thing probably I'm sure you've noticed is some of the buildings are just boxes. The next step is the cardstock models. My intent is to go through and then eventually do them scratch built in styrene or other things.
You have a lot of Amazon warehouses on your layout right now. I know that. But,
I think a lot of people do. Yeah. So,
except for all the ads are upside down for some reason. Yeah.
But I like to have the buildings in place because then I can visualize how things are going to work out. Because I really like the what do they call it? The urban canyon type look of things, and just having and I like to experiment with different shaped buildings so they're not all just square on the layout. And I change my track plan a lot based on how the operating sessions go. And I've been removing more and more track as we go on, and I see how things work because I want less track and more scenery and buildings. And I think there's a balance there for how much track you have and the operating possibilities. Like, as you know, some of the jobs I have are shove moves all the way from the yard to where you go so that I don't have to put a runaround track in because that would just crowd the area. The largest shelf on my layout is less than 2 feet, so I don't want solid track work everywhere. I want a lot of extra space.
And I believe the prototype runs that way too, right? With quite a bit of shoving operation and whatnot as well. So that it kind of matches up to that.
Yeah, I think, from looking at that particular area in Google Earth, it looks like there is a shove move down from the Mansfield, yard area into the industrial park. I haven't been able to pick up on any runarounds unless they're doing it on the New England corridor, which is possible, but I don't model that. So
right. So yeah, and you were talking about changes, and I want to get into that a little bit as well. You definitely have what I've kind of joked and we've all acknowledged as the mark of a true model railroader, which is the shadows where track has been airbrushed and then moved. So you've got quite a bit of that going on, and with the way you're doing your buildings, it's again another advantage to flexibility to be able to move those buildings around and not be tied up in a whole ton of money, bashing a kit and whatnot.
Yeah. So, one of the things that happened was I read Lance Minheim's book, The Art of Model Railroading, and he suggested keeping your track, I think it was 6 inches away from the backdrop. So I had a post on one of my blogs where that was like 3 years ago when that book came out, and I had a big FU Lance Minheim because now I got to redo my layout, and I've been going through and pulling everything away from the backdrop so the buildings can be a little bit bigger as much as possible. And I think it's going to make a big difference when it's done.
Yeah, you definitely curse some of those guys. You mentioned one, in our group and whatnot. And you mentioned him earlier, Don Iris, and and Lance as well. When you read or any of these articles and stuff, and you see something new, that challenge of going, or they mention, or give you some heads up. It's great advice, but it's like, it's like, do I really want to tear that? You're right. Do I want to tear this apart and fix it? And boy, the more they're right, the more painful it gets because you end up realizing, I got to do it. I got to take it apart.
And like I said, that festered for 3 years before I finally did it. And I think, like the Boston Cedar area, it was a little bit changed to the track work to make up the space, but I think the operations are still the same. So I think it was a good change up to make, and that buildings will be more what I want to see.
Yeah. So you actually, you had a big change that you were contemplating in February of 2021, almost a year ago, a little over a year ago. And you had a whole track thing drawn. I want you to talk through that process, because that's something that we all go through, the desire to change, and then talk through that a little bit. Tell us about what you were thinking about, and then where you ended up landing on that.
So you mentioned this earlier. You and I have the smaller layouts in our group of friends that we operate on. So I often go through these bouts of layout envy, what I call a lapse of faith in what I've done. So I'll go over to like Mark Herrick's or Tony's, Kyle. Everyone's layout is bigger than ours, and I always get to this point a couple times, every few years. I need to do a bigger layout. I have the room. I could expand the attic. The attic is empty on the other side. I could take up the whole attic of the house and do a big layout and do what I originally planned on from Framingham down to Mansfield. So I went through and I've designed that thing, not quite as much as Joe Mamie, but I've done a lot of track plans for that with double deck and helixes and everything else. And I think about it for a long time. And fortunately, I keep coming back to, okay, I like what I have. Everyone else seems to like what I have, and it fits the amount of time that I have to work on it. And kind of I've eavesdropped on you guys talking at, or the operators talking at other sessions, and Mark, everyone actually has said there's certain things they like about my layout. So that was enough encouragement to not change it, not tear it down, and not be offline for years, because I made some minor changes after the pandemic. And it took me a couple of months to get back up and running, and I didn't like that at all, because I like having everyone over. The layouts changed from something for me personally to being something that I build for the operators in the group. It's because I really enjoy having the people over to operate on a monthly basis.
Yeah, and so with what you were saying there, we do, and for those that don't know, Mike and I are both members of the Tri-State Railroaders Operators Group, and some of the folks that he had mentioned in that, Mark Herrick and Tony Donatelli, and you and I both have that same dilemma of the small man syndrome, I guess, for layout's sake, right? I've got a very small layout. Yours is bigger than mine, but we're kind of similar in size, in that category. Minimal running, but we have plenty of switching. And, and I think that's where we both go back to, we'll go to a Mark Herrick's layout, or we'll go to Tony Donatelli's, and there's some great track running on that. We're running out to it. It takes a while to get there. But, in the end, if you condense all that down, we kind of run neck and neck with them, in some areas of operating. Yep. And, it's about, without the running, it's keeping them busy as well.
Yeah, all of our sessions are 2 to 3 hours for everyone in the group, right? No matter how big your layout is, our sessions usually go from 7 to 9 or 10.
Right.
And at my house, there's usually so I run 2-man crews, and they usually do 2 jobs a night. And that's, I think that's worth everyone's time to drive out for that kind of session. And same thing with yours. You do 2 or 3 jobs a night. We were there for 2 or 3 hours. It's perfect, I think. And I think we keep right up with the bigger guys with without so much running, but a little bit more complicated or challenging switching.
Yeah, and that's kind of what it's about. If we can keep guys busy on our layout for that 2.5 to 3 hour period, we've really accomplished the goal. And so it's hard, it's so hard to get over. I mean, we'll have these conversations, and then we'll have our mindset, and we'll go, yeah, we're good, right, Mike? Right, we're good, right? Our layouts are good. But then you go back over there again, and then you see a train running for a while, and then your mind starts to run again. Yeah. So it does seem like that constant battle, doesn't it? That just trying to fight that off.
Yeah, I do have to fight it off all the time. It's always right there. It seems like, oh, I could have 3 crews over, so then I wouldn't have to pick and choose who could come over, or things like that. Or I could easily accommodate another person if someone else shows up.
Right.
Or wouldn't it be nice to have this whole stretch of track that goes from here to there, so it took you 4 or 5 minutes to get where you were going. Yeah. That's always in the back of my mind.
Right.
But I guess you don't need it. I don't need it. It's fine. I come back to, I'm happy with what I have. And for me, it's what I can handle. Like, I couldn't maintain something like Mark or Tony's layout, even once I got it built.
those are all things, and we talk about when, in that track planning process. And, when you're thinking about, not even track planning, but just layout planning, when you're thinking about this, there's so many factors to think about. And that's one of them. And when you have these massive layouts, you got to maintain this thing. You got to be able to, spend the time doing that. And plus you got to have all the time to build that. So kind of advantage us for being busy guys, working full time and having a family. And boy, you've got it in, full-time farmer. So you're working 24/7 in sense, and sometimes you're just not going to be able to lay out that much time. So that small layout really becomes a blessing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Especially, it'll be Wednesday night and I haven't even gotten ready for an op session yet. And it's a quick zip around with a little vacuum cleaner to clean the track and wipe it down with alcohol and reset the car cards. I can get it all done in like an hour if the, worst comes to worst. So it works out. And I've had to do that many times.
Well, truth be told, we're recording this on a Tuesday night, and in 2 nights we'll be hosting at my house, and all the trains are facing in the wrong direction as of right now. So yeah, I know that feeling. But boy, it's nice to be able to go down there and know that in about 30 to 45 minutes, I could have that thing pretty much ready to operate. So that definitely is a relief. As for me, having young kids and a family and a whole bunch of other projects going on, including this new podcast, that frees me up to be able to do these kind of fun things as well.
Yep.
One thing that I want to definitely cover with your layout, and maybe the blessings again of having a small layout, is that you can be laser focused on some of these operating areas that you have. And one I really want to talk about, and we're going to definitely put some pictures up on Facebook when the show comes out, is New England Sugars, because that seems to be probably you've got some other great operating schemes, but New England Sugar everybody seems to go back to that one being just a really awesome thing. So I'd like you kind of talk everybody through that, they'll see the pictures, but kind of talk them through that and how you came up with that scheme, because boy, is it really fun to operate.
Yeah. So that's, the whole idea for the corn syrup was based off of Jim Lincoln's article that he did quite a few years ago on the corn syrup plant. I think it used to be in Framingham or Marlboro. And what he talked about there was that's where I first heard about, the different grades of syrup going to certain spots, the track for steaming, and the fact that at that location, some of the cars were spotted following a switch or turnout so that you couldn't get to the other areas. So that all sounded like, a great way to enhance operations. So I looked at, I had driven, when I drive into Worcester, I see New England Sugars all the time. It's right off of the highway. So I started looking at that on Google Earth, and I had to make some adjustments for the space that I have. But I came up with something that's fairly similar to that, that real life location. And I came up with a plan for specifying where cars need to go in a certain order. So that adds to the challenge of it. And it's simple. It's just shuffling cars back and forth. There's no runarounds. You pull in off to the side, off to the spur for that area. There's a little 2-track yard for that. And then there's 2 tracks with 3 sets of locations for cars. So that facility on my layout accepts grain and it accepts corn syrup. The corn syrup gets spotted where it's unloaded, but the concept is you have to heat that corn syrup at the steam location before it's spotted. So you'll get a train will come in. There may be cars on the yard left from the last session that would need to go to either a spot or to the steam location. There's cars that have been heated, so they're at the steam location, they need to get spotted, and cars that would go into the grain locations.
Yeah, so you've got I wanted to say that, you know, with the spotting and whatnot, boy, does that, you know, I've operated it, I believe, and to mention, you operate your layout with 2-man crews to be able to accommodate, so conductor and engineer, and I've worked both sides of that, and you know, both times I've seen guys do it slightly different, and that's kind of neat in itself when you start to see other people do it slightly different ways, but ultimately, you've come up with a really great, challenging scheme with the way you got it done. I mean, you've got it measured almost perfectly for some of the spots. Like you cannot take big bites. You have to take small bites out. I mean, you've got a kind of a tail track that you can work off of, but that thing's measured out perfect. You can't sneak an extra car on it, and it will not go. So
yeah, I've adjusted the lengths of those tracks to do that, just to make it that much more challenging. And for me, I don't like running around trains a lot, so I don't like that kind of puzzle. To me, it's a matter of logistically seeing what needs to go where and simple moves, because that, I think, is more what the prototype would do. You know, they don't have this crazy track work, so you just pull in, and to add to that challenge, you have to pull in and stay off the main line. So I limit the amount of area that you have to work in, and I think that really adds to it. The other thing I do is to assign cars at different locations. I use colored chips so that you know, rather than a number or a symbol, there's a colored tag at the location and a colored tag on the car cards, and you have to line those up. And if you have a car that stays spotted so it doesn't get moved, it has to go back to the right location. And that allows me to adjust the difficulty level. I know you've joked if I've had a bad day, and that job is particularly challenging. Yeah, it gives me a lot of flexibility. And I went with the colored chips because on other layouts, there was symbols or little magic marker dots, and it was very hard for me to figure out what color was what. So I just used folded up Post-it notes as my colored chips for now. And I think that makes it a lot easier to understand.
Yeah, it sure does. But I'll tell you, even with those, I've still been burned in that job, like not quite paying attention, or you just shuffle a car in the wrong thing. And yes, I do envision you on a bad day of either farming or your past full-time job going up there and like a 52 deck of cards, just shuffling everything and mixing it up. But it definitely adds to the challenge, and it makes it really enjoyable. So you've done an excellent job with that. And then you've really, within the last few I would say few months, you've added some more scenery there with some buildings and stuff as well. And then I think you've got some additional work that you're adding to the opposite side to make that area perform even more.
Yeah, I'm thinking I want to incorporate Polar Beverages, which is also in Worcester, but not in the same location, to add 2 more car spots to that. So the 2 yard tracks, one of those is going to become Polar Beverages track, I think. And that'll allow slightly different cars to come in, like plastic pellets for the bottles at Polar Beverages that I've seen on Google Earth. Yeah. And just I'll cut down on the number of cars that come in for New England Sugars and add some work at Polar Beverages, and I think that'll be a little more interesting.
Yeah, that's again, we talk about that job a lot. We talk about you know, it is really good, and it's probably within 5 or 6 feet long, would you say?
Well, not counting the tail track, that whole area is about 12 feet. So that tail track can accommodate almost the entire train, you know, if you need to. Yeah. More or less.
Right. So you talk about, you know, areas like, you know, switching, you know, it basically ends up being like a little switching layout within the layout, you know, that whole area. So I know the last time I ran it with our friend Kyle LeBlanc, and we spent the whole night there because, you know, it was new to him, and, you know, and I'm not, you know, it's not like old hand for me. I still have to remember it. And when you only see it once a month, it gives you plenty of time to forget what you had done the last time. So when you get over there, it's like, all right, you got to rethink this whole thing out again. And of course, maybe you've made a slight change in any direction that kind of, you know, gives it. It's not again, the balance too, right? You don't want a job that's a complete brain buster. You don't want to have people, pulling their hair out or whatever's left of it for guys like me. But you also don't want it to make it so easy that they're just dropping cars off. And I think you've hit the right balance with that job.
Yeah, that's what I try to do. I want it to be simple railroading, but challenging. And in that one in particular, you really have to pay attention to what's 3 or 4 moves ahead. Otherwise you'll move a car and set it somewhere, and then it'll be completely in the wrong space or in the way, and then you have to reset everything and try it again. So that one can be a brain buster, I think, but it's not hard railroading, I guess, is the way I look at it. You have to think it out, and if it takes all night, that's better, because then I don't have to squeeze in another job.
Right.
So it works out. And the other thing I try not to do is I try not to make it frustrating. And like you and I at the grain facility in your layout, we needed about a half an inch, and you did some changes there, and so I don't want it so there's, you have to move one car at a time, or you can almost get a car on there. I'll add that half inch if it made sense. And you did the same thing, and it didn't make the job easier or shorter, but it made it more pleasant, right? So you can say, oh, I want to move these 3 cars, and you can do that. Not, oh, I need to move one at a time, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, challenging but not painful, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah. So the mental challenge is there, but that I think the way the layout's set up, it accommodates what you'll want to do.
Right. So with that though, when you make those changes, and maybe not even make the changes, before you make those changes, I think it's kind of key. And I think you've learned as well that it can't be the first time somebody notices something. It's, you got that process of running it multiple times. And I think that's an important thing. Don't make the change on the first time. Run it again and again, and run it 3 or 4 times. I mean, unless it's a major problem, like cars are derailing here.
Yeah. But as far as the length of track and things like that, I use T-pins for my end of track stoppers for a long time, and I run a lot of sessions and see how it works, and I'll adjust those back and forth. And then I think at New England Sugars, it probably took 6 months before I came up with the size for the yard that I wanted and the number of cars that would fit in there. And then I cut the track and did all the scenery around it.
Yeah. And again, that's a great, point, kind of trial and error, these operating things. Have other people run it. Yeah, that's key too. Because when you go in and run it, like if you ran your own New England Sugars, as much as if I go down and I run my own grain mill, the one that's kind of the challenge in my layout, we run them and it's like we assume too much, or we just know too much. It's good to get that person that's never done the job, try to read the instruction cards, and then go in and actually run it that way. Makes a huge difference to actually, fine tuning it down and getting it to where you want it to be, is having that outside opinion.
Yeah. Yep. It's definitely true. The thing that's also good with our group is that, everyone's fine with the state of our layouts. Like mine has very little finished scenery on it, but I work on it almost between every session. So there's enhancements and changes. And if there are issues, I try to get them addressed. But cardboard buildings for now, no one's complained about that. So it gives me time to adjust things and make changes and, hopefully get them so that they work well for the sessions. And then I can finalize things like that. Because I don't know exactly what I want. I make my changes based on watching the people operate. So I do like the mother hen operating sessions. I really run trains during sessions. I watch what everyone else does and try to help and keep track of things that go wrong. And I run stuff plenty on my own. But until things are worked out, I'm going to keep doing that.
All right. And I think one thing that's about our group after the last couple of years, we're just happy to run trains, and it doesn't even matter what it looks like, right? We're just so thrilled to get back on a layout and, get back around to each other's houses after a couple of years and a bunch of, we did Zoom meetings to try to hold each other over. And then once the coast kind of cleared, we got back to operating, and we really do. And have a great group of guys, and, it really, I think it's unique, but I hope that, others listening can have a group just like we have, that guys are just, that they're willing to help you. They're willing to give you great feedback. They don't beat you up. They'll give you some constructive criticism when needed, but ultimately it is really a cool thing that we've got going.
Yeah, and I think we all approach our layouts differently, but we all have good feedback for each other all the time. I think it works out great. So that's nice.
That's the key. If you're down in your basement running it by yourself and it's just for yourself, that's one thing. But when you start getting out and you get some guys that can come over and operate, and then you really start to open your eyes to the possibilities of your own layout, and maybe even things that you never even thought that you could do on your layout. They've shown you the way.
Yep. Yeah. And it's, originally I was just building it for myself, and then I started operating I went to the layout tour, met Don Iris, guy Bill handed me a throttle, and then that was the end of that.
Right.
So then I got into operating with other people, and then one of the things that I designed my layout for specifically was that you could just switch and not have to worry so much about other people coming by. Because when I first started operating at the larger layouts, it was kind of stressful for me to have to worry about screwing up and holding up other trains and everything else. Over time, I learned that that's fine, but when I designed mine, I wanted to avoid all that. So I think it did. That's the way mine's all set up now. But having the 2-man crews is just the reason I do that, is so I can have enough people over so everyone can chat and have a conversation. I had a higher backdrop along the peninsula, which I cut down so that you could talk across the room. Because for me, that changed, fairly quickly, of just running trains by myself to having operating sessions and having a bunch of friends come over and meeting new people, and just the social part of it really drives everything I do now. It's such a big change from the lone wolf modeling that a lot of us were used to.
Right. Yeah. I tell you, the one thing, another topic of conversation you and I've had is the social aspects of our smaller layouts, and a pro to that, right? That, the bigger layouts, you get there, you may chat a little bit in the beginning, and then the guys kind of, they're off, right? One's way over here in the corner, one's behind the peninsula, one's, down on the other end of the layout, and, they're walking by each other, and maybe some small chatter. But for us, we really have some good chats around, kind of inspiration for what we're doing right now with the podcast is, those conversations that have occurred in those. And boy, that's one thing that really is positive of the small layout, where you can see each other. And, if you're at a down moment, it's not too hard to turn around and watch somebody else operating, and you get to see some of the other jobs going on as well. So that really brings a really cool aspect to it.
Yeah. Yeah. That really changed everything for me, was the social aspect of all of this.
Yeah. Another thing I really want to make sure that we cover, because, kind of in the hobby and within the hobby of some of the stuff you've done, and you've helped me out with one project, we'll talk about that as well, is the 3D printing that you've gotten into. And making some of your own components. What got you kind of down that road with the 3D printer, and how long you've been doing that? And
so my long-time career has been software engineering and writing control systems for automated medical robotics stuff. Mm-hmm. So once 3D printers started coming around, and then they started somewhat dropping in price, the whole idea of digital manufacturing, we had them at work, and I didn't really use them, but the mechanical engineers did, and it just fascinated me that now I can design things on the computer, which I'm okay at, and print it out and get something that I could never scratch build. I don't have the skills to build some of the things that I see other people build, but I could design it in SketchUp or 3D Fusion 360, whatever it is, and print it out, make a mistake, print it again, make a mistake, get it right, and then print out a dozen of them, and have little hydraulic gates under my grain cars that represent a gate that opens up and feeds into a pneumatic grain system, and you can't buy those anywhere.
Yeah, that's one we're definitely going to show, because boy, you did a fantastic job on those hydraulic gates, and I'll make sure I share a picture of that. And yeah, it's that challenge, and it seems like that seems to overcome that hope that man, I wish somebody would make this. Now you become that guy, right? You know, I'll do it myself.
Yep. And those printers, like I started out with the FDM, not the resin printers, but the melted plastic ones, which didn't do good enough for modeling. But then the resin printers dropped down to, just a couple $100. And what those things can do is amazing. It's just, you can print out such fine detail. I think I showed you the insulators for the high electric poles that I printed out in transformers, and you can't even see the things, and the printer just cranks them out like nothing. So those all came from Luke Tao and did those and made the files available. So you just download them and print them. You don't even have to do it yourself. So you have the spark arresters and the fuses and everything else that go on the top of telephone poles and around here, and unbelievable stuff that you can do.
Those that want to talk, there's a lot of talk about where the hobby is come from and where it's going, and boy, the technology and the availability of things right at our fingertips has really changed. That's where the changes come from. That ability to, do things like that. A guy, Luke Talon, I believe, is in
Australia.
Australia, right? So a guy from Australia making files available of a thing that's, it looks like a little fleck on your finger when you took the picture.
Yep.
All available, all those little tiny details that you would search around in Springfield for a day and a half to try to find. And now it's right there and available right to you, right at your house, and convenient to do. So
whenever you feel like doing it. Yeah. And, the price of the printers is nothing. An engine costs more than a printer now. So, why everyone doesn't have one is kind of beyond me.
I think it's the intimidation factor. So, I mean, for somebody, you've done this kind of for a living, but for say somebody that's, fairly computer savvy, what kind of difficulty, what kind of entry level is there to get into one of these as far as that knowledge?
Yeah. So if you can just download files and print them out yourself. So Luke Tower, there's a bunch of websites that have HO scale and other scale stuff on them, along with everything else. And then for the resin printers, you download the files, you put them on a thumb drive, you stick it in the printer and hit print. And, as long as you don't have issues with your resin or anything like that, it's fine. So you don't have to know 3D CAD, which can be very challenging. And that's when people talk about this becoming a hobby within a hobby. I think if you start designing all your own, or trying to design your own things, and you don't have those skills, and you have a fairly steep learning curve to get into the 3D CAD work. It took me a long time to get somewhat proficient at that. I mean, I did the pneumatic tank for the grain unloading system I'm doing, and I have more failed prints of that thing than I like to think about. But it's, you spend some time drawing, let it print overnight, you see what it looks like in the morning, you do it again. It's, I wouldn't want to be sending stuff off to Shapeways and paying them to do it for me and getting a mistake and getting it back. So it's convenient, and it's not that expensive anymore.
Yeah. So that's what's really, that ease then really makes it very tempting, at least to have one, especially as you're doing that small detail work. And then, what you're capable of doing. We'll talk about some custom work you did for me. So I have on my layout a beer distributor, and I modeled I wanted the sign on the top of the building kind of modeled off of a company named Star Distributors down in West Haven, Connecticut. And they had a Miller High Life, shaped logo, or the sign on one side and then a banner on the other. And I called on your talents, and lo and behold, you were able to create something that doesn't exist anywhere else. There's no way I'd ever buy that anywhere. And it's something that was being able to brought to us by your talents in the 3D printer.
Yeah. And you sent me a picture. I loaded it into software. I turned it into a 3D shape. I tweaked it. I exaggerated some things a little bit so it was, nice and visible, and printed it out. It was easier than I expected, and it came out nice on once you put the signage on everything. It looks really nice. So
yeah, it took a project that I'm thinking about. Oh boy, I gotta try to cut that styrene even, and then that shape and make it match, and then tack the banner on it on the right hand side, and I didn't have to do any of that. It just came basically a little bit of sanding, and then I painted it. I mean, it really took a project that I thought was going to be a massive undertaking and turned it into a simple thing. And it's really one of the cooler, one for me at least, one of the cooler things of my layout is that sign. It really stands out, and it really serves the purpose that I was looking to do, which was name that building what I wanted to name it, and put the Miller High Life on there. So it was really cool. I'm appreciative of that. And boy, 3D printing and that technology has really got us there.
And it's like I made a bunch of porta potties years ago. I see them for sale now, but I didn't see any for sale back then. So I, take a few pictures of porta potties, however creepy that is, and I built them, and that was a lot of fun to figure out. And that's when I really learned how to design some of that stuff. And Don Iris has Don's Johns on his layout that I made for him. And it's, once you do it once, that's the other thing, you do the work to come up with the file. Once it's done, you want to print out another one, you just print it. You don't have to do anything, right? You just print it again. Yeah. So it's a lot of fun. I haven't gotten totally involved in that. I don't do a ton of design work, and I'm going to get back to doing a little bit more, but I also, I don't want to become the dominant part of my hobby as well either. So I kind of limit as much work as, I don't do a ton of work on that.
Yeah, that can definitely be where you set your limits, especially us. And then you're still laying track. I'm still, doing some super detail, not even super detailing. I'm still continuing to do stuff. I need to do backdrop photos and a whole bunch of other things. But I can also see where, with a smaller layout, we're going to have those opportunities to do that super detailing work, and and with the 3D printer and whatnot, you move the hobby shop and the customization right into your own house, and the wild things you can come up with beyond porta potties. And we've talked about a shed that I'm looking for and I haven't found yet, and and just little tiny things that there's a Pepsi machine now I want to install in my layout, just little tiny detail, things that are out in the real world that you can create it all, because and sometimes it's a wonder how far do you go, because there's just so much you can do.
Yeah, and lots of people are doing it. I mean, there's lots of guys that are making all these little details now. I saw some at Springfield the last time I went. A lot of duct work and things like that. It's just stuff that, sure, better modelers could scratch build it, but I can draw it and print it out way better than anything I could scratch build. So, and arguably it's still scratch building. So, yeah, I just think it's great.
And ultimately, what's the end result? What do you, when you're building your layout to have these details on it and whatnot, you're accomplishing it and still within the time restraints that you have to build the layout. I mean, if we were both retired men without jobs, and somebody else was out there, taking care of the cows and doing the things, then we could really maybe focus on. But I guess that's what you got to decide on your layout too. What are the things you're going to focus on? Is it going to be scratch building buildings or scratch building super details, or are you going to kind of either farm them out or take another route that frees you up to do the things that you really love? And I know your passion is doing the buildings and setting up that urban look that you're looking for. So that allows you to drill down on that.
Yeah, the other thing is, with the 3D printing, it's just you can make things that no one else has, and it's convenient. If I need something, I could print it out tonight and have it tomorrow, versus either going on Amazon or some other website or driving down to the hobby store and back, which is, just takes time. And I find it enjoyable to design stuff that no one else has too.
Yeah, the uniqueness, like the custom stuff is just really fun. That's the stuff that people pick up on. It's hard. Sometimes you end up with duplicate things on multiple layouts. I mean, you talked about the rite of passages, the double truss, Walther's Bridge. Everybody's got to have one, and everybody's got to try to build one at least once to see just how fun it can be to try to put that thing together, right, and keep it square and the whole 9 yards. So, those are rite of passage things that everybody has, and I know multiple people with that bridge on their layout, but when you come up with stuff that's unique, you've never seen it before, that's really the stuff that starts to pop on a layout.
Yeah, and I think, for a modern layout where you don't have some of the craftsman structure style kits that the transition era modelers would have. I think you really need to have those types of details to make your square steel sided building interesting. So, gas meters, parking posts, the ductwork on the top, different kinds of doors and windows rather than what you see in a Rick's kit, and just really add to those buildings so that they can be more of a craftsman kit than what you would get out of the box.
Yeah, and do you find that, because I think I got my own opinion, but I'm going to ask you, both of us modeling the modern era, does it seem more challenging in sense to try to find things for the modern era versus the past?
Yeah, that's kind of one of my whatever you want to call it, but it's very frustrating to look and see all these craftsman kits and all the new craftsman kits that are all older type things. Or I think there's an opportunity for someone to come up with craftsman kits for modern steel buildings or concrete slab buildings. That maybe there's not all the angles and shingles and shakes and clapboard siding and everything, but there are, once you're modeling that and you start looking around, there are a lot of details and a lot of subtle differences to these buildings that they're not in the kits. If you buy a what's it called, like the Bud's Trucking Company from Walthers, right? It's exactly the same sides. All Walthers kits have the brick on the bottom and the steel on top, and that's not what everything looks like. So I think there's an opportunity there for some craftsman style modern buildings.
Yeah, and I get that you could mix in a few of those older buildings into a modern building, because some of those older buildings are still available, right, or are still around in the prototype rather.
Yeah,
but it's not all of them, and for every 10, right, 8 have been demolished for a new building, and then you have the 2 old ones. So yeah, and then you try to mix the 2 together, and for me at least, it just doesn't seem like they blend well together when you're talking about a Walthers kit sitting next to a Craftsman kit. Now you've got a real mix on your layout. So yeah, I do think the market, does have a place, at least for the 2 of us on this show tonight, for some modern buildings that are maybe a step up from the traditional basic kit for that. So,
and that's kind of Lance Minheim and Thomas Klomoski mentioned that not every building has to be exceptional, because not every building is exceptional in the real world. There's a percentage of really nice standout buildings, but by and large that should be a smaller percentage, because that's how the real world is. There's a lot of square tin steel buildings out there.
Yeah, you mentioned Lance Minheim, and we've talked about some others. Who have been some of the influences of yours in your modeling?
Definitely Lance, and then Tom Klomoski. He came out with a new book last year, I think, that building the right size layout, which really applied. But I have all of Lance Minheim's books. He has a lot of books on small layouts, and I poured over those when I was coming up with my ideas for just what you can do in a smaller space, what you can do with narrower shelves, big aisles, and things like that. And he had his operating ideas. He had the one turnout layout, which Joe Mammy built and talks a lot about. So there's a lot you can do without a lot of track work, without a lot of space. And as you and I have seen, you can keep a group of guys occupied for an evening, in a small area. So that's where I picked up a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, it goes back to that saying that we've covered a few times, that less is more. At times, that you don't necessarily need either a bigger layout, or you don't need to necessarily fill every ounce of space with a building or, that neutral space. And, that's realism, that gives you that, even in compression, it definitely helps with that realism aspect.
Yeah. And one of the big changes I just did on my layout was I took out 2 jobs. So my layout's laid based around streets. So the jobs are named after streets. So I had 2 jobs that were at the ends of the layout that I took out, because even with that small of a layout, we often didn't get to run them. And now I have a transition area or a negative space of probably 6 feet of there will be buildings and trees, but there won't be any work to do in there. You'll pass through it. So it breaks the area up a little bit. So, and that came from Lance and Thomas's books.
Yeah,
a negative space.
absolutely. Have you been a model railroader? I mean, you talked about the one down in the New Haven area. I'm jumping back to that and thinking about it. How about before that, Mike? Have you been a lifelong model railroader? Has this been a life's passion, or is this something that you've come into kind of late? Or
So there's a picture I have of my dad and me at Christmas time. So at Christmas time, when this picture was taken, I was 5 months old, watching Lionel run around on the floor. That was his Lionel train, which I still have. So that was kind of instilled in me from the very beginning. Another thing is that the Grand Trunk Railroad went right through our farm, or was going to. So there's a big cut, and the track was going to go through that. It was going to go over the reservoir. I can go stand on the pilings, or the temporary pilings that were there for the trestle that was going to go over it. So that whole train thing has been a part of my life since day one, pretty much. So I had my dad's Lionel trains post-war, 027, when I was little. And my dad and my uncle, growing up, they had a Markland layout in this house that I'm in now that they brought back from Germany after the war. And that when we were little, we could only look at it. We couldn't even get close to it. Right. So that was like a dream to get to see that run. And I have that as well now. So it's been a lifelong passion, I guess. It's just, it's always been there in the background. And it's just something I've always enjoyed doing.
Yeah, and then you finally were able to tackle that. When were you able to start doing stuff on your own? When you were able to finally start on a layout of that was yours?
Yeah, so in the 12 preteen area, I had a large space that I took over in my parents' basement, and I built a big spaghetti bowl of HO track that just went everywhere for no rhyme or reason.
Right.
And then just eventually learned more and more about what you could do with a model railroad. Then I switched over to the Markling trains. I had the layout based on that built in that basement. That was fun, but that was all antique stuff that ran okay, but it wasn't great. And again, I was a lone operator at that time, a lone wolf, so it was just a different than what we've transitioned to now. Took a break when we had kids, and then once the kids got older, I started getting more involved in it, and had a little extra money to be able to buy this stuff over again and start over again. And that's when I was started looking at New Haven, and that was basically because I liked the HH660 Atlas little engines, and the New Haven paint scheme was really nice. So again, I picked a railroad because of the paint scheme. So.
Well, if any reason, at least you like the way it looks and whatnot. Yep. Yeah. Well, so, I mean, guys have chosen other railroads for other weird, odder reasons, I'm sure. And,
yep.
You like what you look. And, the CSX that you are now, like you said, it's fairly close to you. So that makes it it makes it convenient as well. So there is one aspect of your layout. I'm maybe jumping a little bit here, but I want to definitely make sure we talk about it. It's such a simple thing, but boy, do I love the hell out of them. And maybe one day I'll steal one off your layout or something. But you took it's a Caboose Industries switch, right? The switch stand.
The ground throw.
The ground throw, Caboose Industries. And you've created this, and this will be a thing that we'll share up on Facebook for those listening and be able to see them. You turned it into basically a back saver switch. And boy, I just love the heck out of those things because it just has such a modern look. We talk about modern and trying to find modern things, and the back saver is a fairly modern switch as far as I'm concerned and whatnot. So, talk about that process because those things are just wicked cool to me.
Yeah, so that was one of those things where, we all know what the Caboose hobbies ground throws look like. They're fine, but they don't look like anything to me.
Right.
And yeah, I really like the back savers in real life. I just think they look modern, right? That's what they look like, the right kind of thing for what I'm doing. So, those ground throws are made out of Delrin plastic, whatever. So they're very slippery and all this and the other thing. And, I looked online and people are like, oh, you can't, they're hard to glue. You can't do this. You can't do that with them. So I said, well, I'm going to try this. All I did was basically take a piece of, I cut the handle off, drilled a hole through it. I took a piece of wire. I came up with something that was close to the right size, but also big enough to work with your hand, so you can pick it up with your fingers. I bent it into that triangle type shape. I dipped it in tool dip. Well, I tried a couple different things. I used paint. I used tool dip. Tool dip seems to last pretty well. And then I just super glued it on, and they've lasted for years. So I really like the way they work. Everyone seems to like the way they look, and they work fine because you're not really changing any of it. So I think I just like the way they look in pictures compared to other things, and you don't have the problem. There's always something to grab on it when you go to change, flip the turnout. So it's I'm pretty happy with them.
Yeah, that's that kind of balance between having something that looks scale on your layout, but yet you've still got the one-to-one fingers that are going down there to operate it. And I think you've really hit the perfect balance with those back savers, and I like the way they look. You use that, like you said, that tool dip to make the handles, and they are able to grab, but they have that. You did such a phenomenal job with that, and I can't wait to share this with everybody listening, because it's just a really neat modification. It's not overly complicated, but boy, it can really make a difference on a layout, and especially during ops, to be able to throw a switch nice and easy.
Yeah, well, thanks. I get lots of comments on everyone that sees them, because I don't know if anyone else has done that. I've seen the back savers that are etched brass, but they're not functional.
Yeah. So you talk about your software background. You seem to be kind of like one of those tech-driven guys. You like that aspect of the railroad, model railroading, the hobby. One of the things I know that you had gotten into very early was the proto throttle from Iowa Scaled Engineering. Why don't you talk a little bit on that and tell us, kind of what got you involved with getting a proto throttle, and what your initial thoughts after having it for quite a while now are of the proto throttle.
Yeah, so it's a lot of fun. I think it adds a lot of seems like realism, more of a challenge to operate the engines, and it helps slow things down. So on a small layout, you want to run things slower so that it takes some time. But just with the braking and all that adds, and you can tune your engines to function, really prototypically with all the different stuff you can do. Now, I haven't mastered the CVs and the programming of the engine yet. I worked on it for a while, and then I started changing my layout again, so that's kind of on the back burner. But I have one engine that's set up and programmed to the Dakota's all set up for that to work with the proto throttle, and it's a lot of fun with that. So it's just, and I think what Iowa Scale Engineering was doing was just fantastic. So I was really anxious to support them and buy one, and give them the money to keep doing it, because I think those are the kind of things that really, make the hobby very interesting to me, and to younger people that are more technology driven, I guess. It's something that's really cool, and I think it's a lot of fun.
I definitely agree, and I think that part of the challenge that many talk about bringing younger people into the hobby, and how do you get younger people involved? To me, it's about relating to them. And that's the kind of stuff that they're into. They're into the technology stuff. They're using phones like we've never thought of phone be used before. They're using technology we never dreamed of in everyday life. And they're being taught, basically brought up and bred into this. And for the hobby to attract younger kids, we can't just, we can't beat them back on old technology. It's just not it's not appealing, and it certainly doesn't relate to them.
Yeah, and I have a Raspberry Pi that runs JMRI, so I can use Y throttle on my layout. It's cheap, it's easy to set up, and I think the Wi-Fi throttle is more responsive than the NC radio throttle. It's I use that a lot when I'm running stuff on my own. I think it's just a lot easier to do. And, people complain, oh, you don't have a button, it's not tactile. But like you said, people that have grown up with cell phones in their hands, you know where the buttons are. Even I know where the buttons are when I use it. You don't have to feel anything. It just works. And it's so much easier. They don't have to go buy a throttle at $150 whatever dollars a piece. You don't have to buy throttles for everybody. So those kind of things, they make a lot of sense nowadays. And I do think it helps with the people to get in and enjoy different aspects of the hobby. Absolutely.
And again, what may work for those that have been in the hobby for a long time, these younger guys come in and this is the stuff that they're going to want to use. They're going to want to see what they can relate to. We like to build models to things that we've seen and we relate to, and they're no different. Just remember, they haven't seen the things that you have. Yeah. They don't remember those eras. They certainly don't remember, the era before ditch lights, and then add on to that, right? They just that's not what they're into. So if you want to have this thing attractive to a younger person, just remember what they're going to be able to relate to,
and let them run your trains, right? Be welcoming to anyone that wants to go on your layout. Any one of us could break something on your layout just as easy as a kid could. We all have. If you're going to operate your train, stuff's going to get broken. So I would welcome anyone that wants to come and run on my layout, and I don't care how old they are. And I think that's the most important thing, is to let other people enjoy the hobby and see what's possible, and just be very welcoming to anyone that has any interest at all.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice, Mike. Well, we're going to wrap up tonight's little chat here we've had with Mike King, and want to thank you for coming on Around the Layout and sharing your story of your layout, and we'll definitely have you back on as you're making more progress on your layout and making the changes that you're talking and so on, and love to get some more updates from you. So, Mike, thanks for coming on, and we'll be seeing you at an operating session soon.
Yep. All right, Ray. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. And I'll see you Thursday.
You bet. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. You'll find more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Learn more about the show and check out past and future episodes on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks again for hanging out with us around the layout.